Would you be surprised that more people are still dying than would be expected? Well, this is part of the reason why I still talk about what's going on, because I know something isn't right. What's supposed to happen is that if you had a pandemic where a lot of people died, the people who died die only once, not twice, not three times. So, especially if they are more frail, if they're older, when they have died, it means that in the years beyond, you have less people in that cohort who are going to die. So, what normally happens is a principle called mortality debt, where if you have excess deaths in one year, what would then happen in the year afterwards is you would have lower debts until it comes back to the baseline. That's typical of what you would expect. So, you would expect that after the pandemic, deaths should be below the baseline of 2015 to 2019. So, what we're looking at today is the data from the CDC, Provisional COVID 19 Mortality Surveillance. This is always quite valuable for us to reflect on and to see where we are objectively. Because at the end of the day, you want to know really what is going on. So let's just take a look at some pretty basic stuff. And so we're going to start with a chart because sometimes the chart helps us to understand a little bit more about what is going on. So what we've got here is a chart looking at mortality on a weekly basis, counts of deaths from all causes. Doesn't matter if they fell out of a bus or if they were shot in a gunfight or if they died of COVID, from 2015 all the way to 2025. And depending on the year, would determine the lines. All the way up to 2019, the lines are gray, different shades of gray. And you can see it down here. These are the numbers for 2015 to 2019. When you hit 2020, you can see in the United States there was a peak about here. This was about March to April when COVID hit. It goes down, and you can see towards the end of the year, it starts to rise again. And then in 2021, deaths were high, they came down, and then this represented the Delta wave. So it wasn't as high as the first wave, and it was largely because that a number of the high risk cohort were vaccinated. So it wasn't as high as before. But then you go into 2022. This is the beginning of the Omicron wave. Now, this was the first red flag because Omicron to the rest of the world was a mild infection. But it seems that in highly vaccinated regions, it wasn't so mild. And this was the first red flag that I could see that something isn't right here. And in my view, it represents what I call the storm, where if the immune system is already primed, then it also gets exposed again with infection, is primed some more and more infection. You can still get unusual patterns of mortality. So, as we come back to the chart, when we look at where we are now in 2025, this is the blue line. Now, remarkably, earlier in the year, it was higher than even 2024 and 2023. It's only 2022 that was above it. I don't think that's expected. And when you look at the trend for the period 2015 to 2019, that blue line is still trending above it. It appears to come down here, but not all deaths have been recorded. So I suspect it is going to remain above the trend all the time. So, taking you back to the idea of a mortality debt. If a lot of people died in one year, you should go below the baseline. In 2 years, it should be even lower than the baseline. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, and it's still above the baseline. that indicates something is wrong because all of these peaks and troughs above the baseline oftentimes represent older cohorts who have died already and so are not there to die again. So, who is dying in this blue line? And the mere fact that you're not hearing much about it should indicate to you what their status is likely to be. Because I guarantee you that if at this point, now let's follow this here, this is an important point. At this stage in 2021 and also in 2020, these deaths here were primarily unvaccinated people who were exposed to COVID. But as the population got more exposed to COVID and got natural immunity, that trend shifted. And so, even within the Omicron era, I would love to see the statistics there when the Omicron era hit. What percentage of that surge were between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated? And this is when the transition shifted, where primarily it seems, because nobody is saying it, one can therefore assume that the majority of deaths are primarily in the vaccinated cohort. You will be told that they're older, they have more comorbidities. That is true. However, the numbers still are elevated. So, the other part that we need to look at is when you actually look at the real numbers, total numbers. And what I've done is I've taken a look at the chart because what has happened with statistics is that statistics can be a little bit of a nightmare. I'm a simple numbers guy. And although it doesn't take into consideration all the nuances, I think it's still important to be able to see numbers. And so, what we're looking at here is deaths per week, whether it's COVID, all causes, and pneumonia. And what I'll be showing you is I took the early part in 2020 and I compared it to where we are now to try and get a sense of what is going on. And so, what I've got here is I've put it together in a slide so that you can see it. So what I've got here is 2020, excess deaths in early 2020. And you can see the week ended, all the deaths involving COVID-19, deaths from all causes, percent of expected deaths, and deaths involving pneumonia, influenza, or COVID. And you can see here, this is all 2020, 4th of the 1st, 11th of January, 18th, 25th, all the way up to the 14th of March in 2020. And you can see this is just about where the numbers start to rise in the United States. You can see that deaths from all causes, this is a typical trend, worse in the winter, gradually getting better as you go towards the spring and summer. So 60,000 to 58,000. And over here, deaths involving pneumonia, influenza, or COVID at about 4,500 to 600. This is about the baseline. This is what we would expect. And this is where you would expect things to go if things were normal. So, as I said, let's now look at 2025, the same time period. What does that look like? Suddenly, similar thing, 4th of January, 11th, 18th, 25th, all deaths involving COVID 19. These are still high. Now, that's a red flag because, as I told you, the majority of these are likely to be in the vaccinated cohort because you're not hearing anything about it. And the unvaccinated have natural immunity, so they don't really die of COVID. But look again at deaths from all causes 64,000, 63,000. Now, you have to remember, compared to what it was before, if I can go back, compared to, what it was before here in 2020, you can see 60,000 to 58,000. Compared to now in 2025, 64,000 to 63,000. This indicates that all cause deaths remains elevated in the United States. Maybe a lot of people are fighting in a war. I don't know. I don't know why so many people are still dying. And again, deaths involving pneumonia, instead of 4,000, it's 5 to 6 to 7,000. This is not what you would expect. And this is the point I'm making, is no matter which way you color this, no matter how much narrative goes out, and the narrative just keeps on going on, how many millions were saved. The problem with science is that uncle who you met at Christmas, who, if you said to them, "Do I look fat in this?" they would say, as clear as day, "Yes, you've always been like that." They wouldn't try and nice it up, they would just tell it as it is. That's what science is like. It doesn't really do narratives very well because it just is what it is. In the same way, when we look at where we are now with regards to excess mortality, it is not going down. Now, some people think that because it appears to be at a lower level, this is all going to end soon. I disagree. And I'm going to explain very simply why I think this is so relevant. And it's because of this principle of the COVID storm. If you have an environment where on the right with the B, you have a population that is vaccine immune primed, and you have recurring COVID infection in that population, I liken it to the epoxy glue. On their own, each one doesn't cause that much damage. But when you put them together, you get the COVID storm. And one of the problems that we have is that the virus is still circulating. A lot of people think that because it appears to be mild, it's okay. But when you look at patients who are admitted to hospital, the Denmark study indicates that within 30 days, 12% of them are dead, but not from COVID. They just die from multiple other things: heart, lungs, kidney, brain. This is what is happening. This is still a lethal virus. It's just that it's not as exciting as it was early in the pandemic. You could see people getting short of breath immediately. And so you knew, oh my goodness, something is wrong. That's what caused all the attention. But if people were still dying, but just slowly, instead of in a few days, they die in 2 months, does it still matter? Because this is what we're seeing at the moment. The deaths are not going down. And I think we've reached a tipping point. I think that where we're shifting now is that the numbers are going to start climbing again slowly, year on year. So instead of it being 5,000 to 6,000 this year, sorry, let me just take this off, it will be 7 to 8,000 maybe in another year, and then 8 to 9,000 the year after that. And because it's happening so slowly, nobody takes it seriously. What can I say? I suspect that in another 2 years, I can still be talking about this, and people will still not necessarily understand how serious this is in terms of real numbers. A lot of people are still sick, and the numbers of dying, I predict, are likely to just continue to rise gradually. What can we do? Educate each other. Try and see if we can understand what is happening. Because it doesn't make any difference if I think it is just the combination of the COVID infection circulating in highly vaccinated regions. Because if the leadership, if the scientific leadership doesn't look at this, doesn't attempt to mitigate this, the long term implications will be horrendous. As I explain to people, my perfect example is high blood pressure. If you suddenly took everybody off their tablets, you didn't worry about it, you wouldn't see anybody having heart attacks and strokes in great numbers in the first year, not even the second year, maybe a little in the third year. But by the seventh year and the eighth year, you would be seeing people dropping left and right with all kinds of complications. The sad part is, even if at the 7th and 8th year you suddenly decided to take hypertension seriously and put everybody on medication again, The damage to the eyes, the brain, the kidneys, the heart would already have been done. You can't reverse it. And I suspect this is where we are today. I'm not sure how much can be mitigated, but we do have a responsibility to at least try. Thank you for listening.
A hero, an immune adventure, Humming Heroes, your lyrical guide to the body's defenders. Now on Amazon. Check the links below.